Hello everyone and welcome back to Captain Fear. Now I know many of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, my crew members, I'd like everyone to leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. Also, like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfortable and relaxed and let's begin. The incessant beeping of my phone's alarm cuts through my dreams like a knife. I groan, fumbling blindly for the source of the noise. My hand knocks against an unfamiliar nightstand and reality crashes back into focus. I'm not in my bed. I'm in a motel room and I've overslept. Badly. Shit, I mutter, squinting at the too bright screen. It's 11:43 a.m. Checkout was at 11 o'clock. I leap out of bed, my bare feet hitting the threadbare carpet. The room spins for a moment as I battle a wave of nausea, a lovely parting gift from last night's ill-advised drinking binge. Clothes are strewn across the floor, a trail leading from the door to the bed. I gather them hastily, stuffing everything into my duffel bag without bothering to fold. As I dress, fragmented memories of the previous night float to the surface. An argument with Sarah. Angry words. The slam of a car door as she drove away, leaving me stranded in this no-name town. The neon glow of the motel sign, a beacon in the darkness. I shake my head, pushing the thoughts away. There'll be time to deal with that mess later. Right now, I need to check out before they charge me for another night. The bathroom mirror reveals a sorry sight. Bloodshot eyes, stubble, and hair sticking up at odd angles. I splash some water on my face and run wet hands through my hair in a futile attempt to look presentable. It'll have to do. I give the room a final once-over, making sure I haven't forgotten anything. The air conditioning unit rattles weakly, barely cutting through the stuffy air. Sunlight filters through gaps in the heavy curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It's the kind of place that looks infinitely worse in the harsh light of day. Shouldering my bag, I step out into the corridor. The door clicks shut behind me with a sense of finality. The hallway stretches out in both directions, a sea of identical doors set in faded wallpaper. It's eerily quiet. I make my way to the elevator, footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. A cleaning cart stands abandoned outside one of the rooms, stocked with fresh towels and miniature bottles of shampoo. Odd. You'd think they'd be bustling about at this time, turning over rooms for new guests. The elevator arrives with a cheerful ding that seems out of place in the silence. As I descend to the lobby, I rehearse my apology for the late checkout. Maybe if I'm contrite enough, they won't charge me the extra fee. The doors slide open, revealing an empty lobby. The front desk is unmanned, the computer screen dark. A half-empty coffee cup sits abandoned, a lipstick stain on its rim. "Hello?" I call out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. No response. I approach the desk, peering into the back office. Empty. The door to the manager's office stands ajar, but no one's inside. A corkboard on the wall is covered in employee schedules and memos. Nothing seems out of the ordinary except for the complete absence of people. A clock on the wall reads 11:52 a.m. Surely someone should be here by now. I spot a bell on the counter and give it a firm tap. The sharp ding cuts through the silence, but no one appears. Unease begins to creep up my spine. I pull out my phone, thinking to call the motel's number. No service. Great. Maybe there's some sort of staff meeting, I tell myself, or an emergency they had to deal with, but wouldn't they leave a note? I decide to head outside. Maybe I can flag someone down, figure out what's going on. As I push through the heavy glass doors, I'm hit by a wall of heat. The sun beats down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. The parking lot stretches out before me, a shimmering expanse of sun-baked asphalt. It's completely empty. No cars, no people, not even a stray piece of litter skittering across the ground. My heart begins to race. This isn't right. There were at least a dozen cars here last night. I spin in a slow circle, taking in the scene. The motel sits just off the highway, but there's no traffic. No sound of distant engines or honking horns. Just oppressive, absolute silence. I walk to the edge of the parking lot, peering down the highway in both directions. Nothing but empty roads stretching to the horizon, heat waves distorting the distant asphalt. "Hello!" I shout, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast emptiness. Is anyone there? No response, not even an echo. Panic begins to set in, my breath coming in short gasps. What the hell is going on? Where is everyone? I sprint back to the motel, burst through the doors, and race to the front desk. There has to be a phone, a way to call for help. I rummage through drawers, scattering papers and office supplies. Finally, I find an old corded phone tucked away in a bottom drawer. With shaking hands, I lift the receiver to my ear. No dial tone, the line is dead. Fuck. I slam the phone down, running my hands through my hair. Think. There has to be an explanation for this. I need to clear my head to approach this logically. I take a deep breath, trying to slow my racing heart. Okay, facts. I'm alone in a motel. No staff, no other guests, no cars, no phone service. But the power is still on. The clock is still ticking. Could it be some kind of drill? A terrorist threat that prompted an evacuation? But then why wasn't I woken up and evacuated too? I need more information. Heading back outside, I make my way to the edge of the property. There's a gas station across the highway. Maybe someone there can tell me what's happening. The asphalt is hot enough to feel through the soles of my shoes as I jog across the empty road. The gas station looks just as deserted as the motel. No cars at the pumps, no one visible inside the convenience store. I try the door, locked. Cupping my hands against the glass, I peer inside. The lights are off, but I can make out rows of snacks and drinks. The cash register sits unattended, the display dark. A newspaper stand catches my eye. I crouch down, reading the headline through the scratched plastic. Mandatory evacuation order issued. The date on the paper is today's. My blood runs cold, an evacuation. That explains the empty roads, the abandoned buildings, but why wasn't I evacuated? How did they miss an entire person? I need to get out of here to catch up with everyone else, but how? No car, no phone, no idea which direction they went. Back at the motel, I race up to my room. Maybe there's something there I missed, some clue about what's happening. I reach for my key card, then freeze. The door to my room is ajar. I know I closed it. I distinctly remember hearing it click shut behind me. Heart pounding, I push the door open slowly. The room looks exactly as I left it, but something feels off. The air is different somehow, charged with an unseen presence. And then I see it. A notepad on the desk that wasn't there before. Something's written on it in hasty scrawl. With trembling hands, I pick up the notepad. The message is short, just 4 words, but they turn my blood to ice. You shouldn't be here. I drop the notepad as if it's burned me, stumbling backward out of the room. My foot catches on something, the strap of my duffel bag, which I know I was carrying earlier. How did it get here? Panic overtakes me. I run blindly down the corridor, no longer caring about finding answers. I just need to get out, to get away from this place. I burst out of the motel, gasping in the hot air. The sun seems brighter somehow, painfully so. I squint against the glare, trying to decide which way to run. A movement catches my eye. In the distance, a figure stands in the middle of the highway. Heat waves distort their shape, making them waver like a mirage. "Hey!" I shout, waving my arms. "Over here, I need help!" The figure doesn't move, doesn't react at all. But as I stare, I realize with dawning horror that it's getting closer. Not walking, not running, just closer. As if the distance between us is collapsing. I blink, and suddenly it's at the edge of the parking lot. I can make out details now. A dark suit, unnaturally long limbs, and where the face should be, just a blank, featureless expanse. Terror grips me. I turn to run, but my legs won't move. I'm rooted to the spot, unable to do anything but watch as the figure glides towards me with unnatural speed. It's only feet away now. I squeeze my eyes shut, bracing for whatever comes next. "Sir," the voice jolts me like an electric shock. My eyes fly open. I'm standing in the motel lobby. A young woman behind the front desk is looking at me with concern. "Sir, are you all right? You seemed out of it for a moment there." I blink rapidly, looking around in confusion. The lobby is bustling with activity. A family with young children is checking in. A bellhop wheels a cart loaded with luggage towards the elevator. What? I manage to stammer. The woman, her name tag reads Emily, gives me a sympathetic smile. "You were saying something about oversleeping and a late checkout? It's no problem, really. These things happen. I'll just need your room number and key card." Still dazed, I hand over my key card. As Emily processes my checkout, I glance outside. The parking lot is full. Cars zoom by on the highway. "Here you go, sir. You're all set," Emily says, handing me a receipt. "I hope you enjoyed your stay with us. Drive safely." I nod numbly, gathering my bag. As I push through the doors into the bright sunlight, I can't shake the feeling that something is terribly, inexplicably wrong. The memory of that featureless face lingers, a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. I hurry to my car, throwing my bag in the back seat. As I slide behind the wheel, my phone chimes. A text from Sarah. "Hope you're on the road. Let me know when you're close." I start the engine, my hand shaking slightly on the wheel. Whatever just happened, hallucination, waking dream, or something else, I need to put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. As I pull out of the parking lot, I glance in my rearview mirror. For a split second, I swear I see a tall, dark figure standing perfectly still amidst the bustle of the motel entrance. I blink and it's gone. I press down on the accelerator, the motel shrinking in my mirrors. But no matter how far I drive, I can't shake the feeling that something followed me out of that place. Something that's now sitting in the shadowy recesses of my mind, waiting. Story 2. The muffled thud from upstairs freezes me in place, my hand hovering over the bowl of popcorn. I hold my breath, straining to hear over the drone of the TV. There it is again, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart pounds against my ribs as I slowly rise from the couch. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson aren't due back for hours. The kids have been asleep for at least an hour. So what was that noise? I'm probably overreacting. It's an old house. It settles and creaks. But as I stand there in the dimly lit living room, I can't shake the feeling that something is very, very wrong. My name is Lily, and this is my first night babysitting for the Andersons. I'm 16, and I've babysat plenty of times before, but never in a house quite this big or this isolated. The Andersons live on the outskirts of town, their sprawling Victorian home surrounded by dense woods. It had seemed charming in the daylight. Now, as shadows stretch across the lawn and darkness presses against the windows, it feels oppressive. I take a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "Get it together, Lily," I mutter to myself. "You're letting your imagination run wild." Still, I can't quite bring myself to sit back down. Instead, I make my way to the bottom of the stairs, my sock-clad feet silent on the hardwood floor. I pause, listening intently. Silence. Just as I'm about to laugh off my paranoia, I hear it, the unmistakable creak of a floorboard from upstairs. My pulse quickens. "Hello!" I call out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the cavernous foyer. "Ethan? Zoe? Are you guys awake?" No response. I should go up and check on them. That's what a responsible babysitter would do, right? But my feet seem rooted to the spot, fear coursing through me like ice water in my veins. Get a grip, I tell myself. They're probably just getting a glass of water or something. Taking a deep breath, I force myself to climb the stairs, each step feeling like it takes a monumental effort. The upstairs hallway is dark, illuminated only by a small nightlight plugged into an outlet near the bathroom. Shadows dance on the walls, cast by tree branches swaying outside the window. I make my way down the hall, passing framed family photos that seem to watch me with lifeless eyes. I reach Ethan's room first. The door is ajar just as I left it earlier. I push it open gently, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. "Ethan," I whisper, peering into the darkness. My eyes adjust slowly, and I can make out the lump of his sleeping form under the covers. His chest rises and falls steadily. Everything seems normal. I back out of the room, pulling the door nearly closed behind me, one down, one to go. Zoe's room is at the end of the hall. As I approach, I notice something odd, a dark smudge on the cream-colored carpet. I crouch down to examine it, my blood running cold as I realize what I'm looking at. A muddy footprint. My mind races. It couldn't be Ethan or Zoe. They were both in bed when I tucked them in, and neither would have any reason to go outside. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson aren't due back for hours, which means... I swallow hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Someone else is in the house. Every instinct screams at me to run, to get out of the house and call for help. But I can't leave the kids. I have to make sure they're safe. With trembling hands, I pull out my phone, ready to dial 911 at a moment's notice. I inch towards Zoe's door, my heart thundering so loudly I'm sure anyone nearby could hear it. The door is closed. I know I left it open earlier, just like Ethan's. I reach for the doorknob, my hand shaking so badly I can barely grasp it. Taking a deep breath, I turn it slowly, easing the door open. The sight that greets me will haunt me for the rest of my life. A figure hunches over Zoe's bed, its back to me. It's tall, too tall to be human, with limbs that seem too long and bent at unnatural angles. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, I can see that it's covered in what looks like wet, matted fur. As the door creaks open, the figure goes still. Slowly, terribly, it begins to turn. I don't wait to see its face. Pure primal terror propels me into action. I slam the door shut and run, my feet pounding against the carpet as I sprint down the hallway. I can hear movement behind me, a scrabbling sound like claws on wood. I reach Ethan's room and burst inside, slamming the door behind me. "Ethan!" I shout, shaking him awake. "We have to go now." He blinks at me groggily, confusion etched on his young face. "What?" "No time," I gasp, pulling him out of bed. "We have to get out of here." A thunderous crash echoes from the hallway, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Ethan's eyes go wide with fear. I grab his hand and pull him towards the window. My hands shake as I struggle with the latch, acutely aware of the heavy footsteps approaching the door. The window flies open just as the bedroom door bursts inward. I don't look back. I push Ethan through the window onto the sloped roof of the porch below. "Run to the treehouse!" I yell, following him out. We scramble across the roof, the rough shingles scraping my palms and knees. I can hear harsh, ragged breathing behind us, getting closer. Ethan reaches the edge of the roof and hesitates. "Jump!" I scream. He does, landing in the bushes below with a muffled cry. I'm right behind him, my feet leaving the roof just as something swipes at my back. I feel a sharp pain as claws graze my skin, tearing my shirt. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment I lie there, dazed and gasping for air. Then Ethan's terrified face appears above me. "Lily, get up!" His fear gives me strength. I stagger to my feet, grabbing his hand. We run across the moonlit lawn towards the treehouse, a hulking shape visible in the branches of an old oak. Behind us, I hear a thud as something heavy lands on the ground. Then the sound of pursuit, moving inhumanly fast. "Climb me!" I yell as we reach the base of the tree. Ethan scrambles up the wooden slats nailed to the trunk. I'm right behind him, my muscles screaming with the effort. We tumble into the treehouse, and I slam the trapdoor shut, sliding the bolt into place. Not a moment too soon. Something slams into the door from below, making the whole structure shudder. Ethan whimpers, pressing himself into the corner. I pull him close, trying to slow my frantic breathing. "It's okay," I whisper, not believing it myself. "We're safe up here." Another impact rocks the treehouse. Wood splinters. It won't hold for long. With shaking hands, I pull out my phone. No signal, of course. "Ethan," I say, trying to keep my voice calm. "Is there a way down from here? Another exit?" He nods, pointing to a rope ladder rolled up by the window. "Dad installed it as a fire escape." "Good," I say, forcing a smile. "That's really good, Ethan. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to lower you down, and I want you to run as fast as you can to the neighbor's house. Don't stop, don't look back. Can you do that for me?" He nods, his eyes wide with fear and trust. I ruffle his hair, fighting back tears. "You're so brave. I'm right behind you, okay?" Another crash from below. The trapdoor bulges inward, wood splintering around the bolt. I rush to the window, unrolling the ladder with trembling hands. "Okay, Ethan, remember, run as fast as you can." I help him out the window and watch as he descends, my heart in my throat. The moment his feet touch the ground, he takes off running, disappearing into the shadows between the trees. The trapdoor explodes inward in a shower of splinters. I spin around, pressing my back against the wall. The creature that pulls itself into the treehouse is like nothing I've ever seen. In the moonlight streaming through the window, I can see matted fur, elongated limbs, and a face that's a twisted parody of something vaguely human. Its eyes, reflecting the moonlight like a cat's, fix on me with predatory intent, I don't think. I move. Diving for the window, I half climb, half fall down the rope ladder. I hit the ground running, my legs pumping furiously as I sprint after Ethan. I can hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush. It's faster than me, I know that instinctively, but I don't slow down, don't look back. The trees thin out, and suddenly I'm bursting onto a lit street. Ethan is there, pounding on the door of a house. Lights are coming on in windows up and down the street. I reach Ethan just as the door opens, revealing a startled-looking man. "Help!" I gasp. "Please, call the police!" As the man ushers us inside, I risk a glance back towards the woods. For a moment, I see a dark shape at the tree line, watching. Then it melts back into the shadows, leaving nothing but the rustling of leaves in its wake. Later, after the police have come and gone, after Mr. and Mrs. Anderson have returned home white-faced and shaken, after I've given my statement a dozen times, I sit on the curb wrapped in a shock blanket. The official story is an attempted break-in by person or persons unknown. No one believes my tale of the creature in the woods. But as I watch the first hints of dawn break over the trees, I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there in the depths of the forest, something is waiting, watching. And perhaps one day it will return. For now, though, Ethan and Zoe are safe. And that's all that matters. I stand up, my legs shaky but holding. It's time to go home, to try and put this night behind me. But as I walk to my mom's waiting car, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I glance back one last time at the Anderson house, its windows now dark and silent. In an upstairs window, just for a moment, I swear I see a tall, misshapen shadow. I blink, and it's gone. Probably just my imagination. At least that's what I'll keep telling myself. It has to be. Story 3. The moment I step onto the subway car, I see him. Same ratty green jacket, same unkempt beard, same piercing eyes that seem to bore right through me. My stomach drops as I realize this is the 5th day in a row he's been on my train. Coincidence? I'm no longer sure. I shuffle to the far end of the car, gripping the cold metal pole as the doors slide shut with a hiss. The familiar lurch of the train starting its journey does nothing to calm my nerves. I can feel his gaze on me, persistent and unsettling. My name is Alex, and for the past week, my daily commute has turned into a waking nightmare. It started innocently enough. Monday morning, I boarded the 8:15 train as usual, my mind preoccupied with the upcoming presentation at work. I barely noticed him then. Just another face in the crowd of bleary-eyed commuters. Tuesday, I remembered him only because of that distinctive green jacket, frayed at the edges and slightly too big for his frame. I thought nothing of it. After all, plenty of people have regular commutes. By Wednesday, a niggling sense of unease had taken root. I found myself watching him out of the corner of my eye, noting how he always seemed to be looking in my direction. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. Big city, crowded subway. Of course, you're bound to see the same faces now and then. Thursday was when the real fear set in. I deliberately waited for a later train, heart pounding as I stood on the platform. Relief washed over me as the doors opened on an unfamiliar sea of faces. Then, just as they were about to close, he slipped in. Our eyes met, and I swear I saw the ghost of a smile flit across his lips. Now it's Friday, and there's no doubt in my mind. This man is following me. I try to focus on my breathing, on the familiar rhythm of the train clacking along the tracks. Anything to distract myself from the prickling sensation at the back of my neck that tells me he's still watching. My stop is coming up. Normally, I'd be gathering my things, preparing to exit. Today, I stay rooted to the spot. If I get off here, he'll know where I work. Hell, he probably already does. The doors open, I don't move. An internal war rages as I watch my usual stop disappear behind us. I've just made myself late for work, but the alternative was unthinkable. 2 more stops pass. The car is emptying out now, the morning rush dissipating. Soon it'll just be me, him, and a handful of others. I need to make a decision. At the next stop, I make a break for it. I don't look back as I hurry up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The station isn't familiar. I'm several stops past where I need to be. But right now, all that matters is putting distance between myself and my pursuer. I burst out onto the street, blinking in the sudden sunlight. Without thinking, I turn left and start walking briskly. My heart is pounding so loudly I can hear it over the rush of traffic. After a block, I risk a glance over my shoulder. My blood runs cold. There he is, maybe 50 feet behind me, walking with purposeful strides. Our eyes meet, and this time there's no mistaking the smile that spreads across his face. Panic surges through me. I break into a run, no longer caring how it looks. I can hear shouts of annoyance as I push past pedestrians, but I don't slow down. I take random turns, trying to lose him in the unfamiliar streets. After what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes, I duck into a small cafe. The bell above the door chimes cheerfully, a stark contrast to the fear churning in my gut. A few patrons look up at my abrupt entrance, but quickly return to their coffees and conversations. I slide into a booth in the far corner, trying to catch my breath. My hands are shaking as I pull out my phone. Who do I even call? The police? And tell them what? That a man has been riding the same subway as me? I don't even know if he followed me into the cafe. Maybe I've lost him. Maybe this whole thing is just a product of my overactive imagination. A shadow falls across the table. I look up, hope dying in my chest as I see the green jacket, the unkempt beard, those unnervingly intense eyes. Mind if I join you? His voice is surprisingly soft, with a hint of an accent I can't place. Before I can respond, he slides into the seat opposite me. Up close, I can see the lines etched deep around his eyes, the flecks of gray in his beard. He doesn't look threatening exactly, but there's an intensity to him that sets my nerves on edge. "Who are you?" I manage to croak out. "Why are you following me?" He smiles, and it transforms his whole face. Suddenly, he doesn't look menacing at all, just tired and a little sad. "My name is David," he says. "And I'm not following you, Alex. I'm trying to warn you." The use of my name sends a fresh wave of panic through me. "How do you know my name? What do you want?" David leans forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I know a lot about you, Alex. I know you work at Meridian Consulting. I know you live in a third-floor apartment on Maple Street. I know you have a cat named Whiskers and that every Sunday you call your mom in Florida." My mouth goes dry. "How, are you some kind of stalker? A private investigator?" He shakes his head. "Nothing like that. The truth is, I'm you, Alex. Or rather, I'm you from about 30 years in the future." For a moment, I just stare at him, waiting for the punchline. When it doesn't come, a hysterical laugh bubbles up from my chest. "Right, of course, you're me from the future. Makes perfect sense." "I know how it sounds," David says, his expression serious. "But I'm telling you the truth. I've come back to warn you, to try and prevent you from making the same mistakes I did. I should leave. I should run out of this cafe and not look back. But something in his eyes, in my eyes, holds me in place." "Prove it," I hear myself say. David nods as if he expected this. "Your first kiss was with Jenny Larson, behind the gym in 7th grade. You were so nervous you bit your tongue. Your biggest regret is not visiting your grandfather in the hospital before he passed away. You have a birthmark shaped like Florida on your left hip. I feel the blood drain from my face. These aren't things a stalker could know. These are things only I know." How is this possible?" David, the older me, sighs heavily. "The how isn't important right now. What's important is that you listen to me. In about 6 months, you're going to be offered a promotion at work, a big one. It's going to seem like the opportunity of a lifetime." I nod slowly, still struggling to process what's happening. "And I shouldn't take it." "Oh, you should definitely take it," David says, surprising me. "But what you do after, that's what you need to change." Over the next hour, David lays out a series of events that will apparently shape the course of my life. The promotion, a whirlwind romance with a coworker that ends in heartbreak, a risky investment that pays off big, leading to a career change, and then the slow spiral into workaholism, the neglected relationships, the mounting regrets. "I've spent the last decade of my life trying to figure out how to go back and fix things," David tells me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And now that I'm here, I realize I can't fix it all. But maybe I can help you avoid the biggest mistakes." As unbelievable as his story is, I find myself believing him. Perhaps it's the raw emotion in his voice, or the way he knows things about me that no one else could possibly know. Or maybe it's just that deep down, I recognize something of myself in him. "What do I do?" I ask, my voice barely above a whisper. David reaches across the table, his hand closing over mine. The touch sends a jolt through me. His skin feels exactly like mine, right down to the small scar on the knuckle from a childhood accident. "Live, Alex," he says simply. "Take the promotion, but don't let it consume you. Tell Mom you love her more often. Don't let fear hold you back from taking chances in love. And for God's sake, don't neglect your friendships. They're more important than you can possibly imagine right now." I nod, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of this knowledge. Will I see you again?" David smiles sadly, shaking his head. "This is a one-way trip for me, but that's okay. If I've done my job right, the future I came from won't exist anymore. You'll write a new story, hopefully a better one." He stands up and I find myself rising with him. Without thinking, I pull him into a hug. It's strange embracing this older version of myself, but also oddly comforting. Thank you, I murmur. David pulls back, his hands on my shoulders. Don't thank me, just live well, that's all I ask. With one last smile, he turns and walks out of the cafe. I watch through the window as he makes his way down the street, eventually disappearing around a corner. I sink back into the booth, my mind reeling. Part of me wonders if this was all some kind of elaborate hallucination, but I can still feel the warmth of his hand on mine, can still see the earnestness in my eyes. My phone buzzes, jolting me back to reality. It's a text from my boss asking where I am. I realize with a start that I'm now very, very late for work. As I gather my things to leave, I pause. The old me would be panicking right now, rushing to the office with 1,000 apologies on my lips. But maybe it's time for a change. I type out a quick reply. Not feeling well, taking a personal day. See you tomorrow. Then, on impulse, I call my mom. As her familiar voice fills the line, I feel a warmth spread through my chest. Hey, Mom, I say, smiling. No, nothing's wrong. I just wanted to tell you I love you. As I step out of the cafe into the bright morning sunshine, I feel like I'm seeing the world with new eyes. The future isn't set in stone. It's a blank page waiting to be written. And I've got one hell of a story to tell. Story 4. The moment I saw him standing in his overgrown front yard, pruning shears in hand and a faraway look in his eyes, I knew inviting the new neighbor over for dinner was going to be interesting. Little did I know, interesting would be the understatement of the century. My name's Sarah, and I've lived on Maple Street for the better part of a decade. It's a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business, but pretends they don't. So when the old Johnson place finally sold after sitting empty for years, it was big news. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, the neighborhood gossip mill was in full swing. Single guy, they said, keeps to himself. Kinda weird looking if you ask me. I try not to put too much stock in neighborhood gossip, but I'll admit my curiosity was piqued. So when I spotted him in his yard that Saturday morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Hi there, I called out, plastering on my friendliest smile as I approached the fence. I'm Sarah from next door. Welcome to the neighborhood. He turned slowly, blinking as if coming out of a trance. Up close, I could see what people meant by weird-looking. It wasn't that he was unattractive, quite the opposite, actually, but there was something off about him. His eyes were a shade too bright, his movements a touch too fluid. Hello, Sarah from next door, he said, his voice surprisingly deep and melodious. I'm Elias. We chatted for a few minutes, exchanging the usual pleasantries. As we talked, I found myself warming to him. Sure, he was a little odd, but in an endearing sort of way. Before I knew what I was doing, I heard myself say, "Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? My husband makes a mean pot roast and the kids would love to meet you." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. What was I thinking, inviting a complete stranger into our home? But then Elias smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. That would be lovely, he said. Shall I bring anything? Just yourself, I replied, trying to ignore the little voice in my head screaming that this was a terrible idea. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cleaning and cooking. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, our little house was spotless, and the aroma of pot roast filled the air. My husband, Tom, was setting the table while our kids, Emma, 10, and Jake, 8, bickered over who got to sit next to our mysterious new neighbor. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:05. Elias stood on our porch, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small potted plant in the other. I know you said not to bring anything, he said with a sheepish smile, but I couldn't come empty-handed. Dinner started off pleasantly enough. Elias was charming, if a bit reserved, answering our questions about his work, something vague in research, and complimenting the food. The kids were on their best behavior, clearly fascinated by our guest. It wasn't until dessert that things took a turn for the bizarre. So, Elias, Tom said as he served up slices of apple pie, what made you choose our little neighborhood? Elias paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Well, he said slowly, I suppose you could say I'm here to study. Oh, I leaned forward, intrigued. What are you studying? You, he said simply. All of you. This street, this town, this way of life. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Tom and I exchanged glances while the kids looked on with wide eyes. "I'm sorry," I said with a nervous laugh, "but I'm not sure I understand. Are you some kind of sociologist?" Elias shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not exactly. I suppose the closest approximation in your terms would be an anthropologist. But from much further away than you might imagine." My heart began to race. Was this guy some kind of nutcase? Should we be worried? "How much further away?" Jake piped up, his voice filled with excitement. Elias turned to him, his eyes twinkling. "Well, young Jake, let's just say that what you call the Andromeda Galaxy, we call that the local neighborhood." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. A heavy, expectant silence like the air before a thunderstorm. "Are you saying," Tom said slowly, "that you're not from Earth?" Elias nodded, taking a sip of his wine as casually as if we were discussing the weather. "That's correct. I'm what you might call an extraterrestrial anthropologist. My people have been observing Earth for quite some time, but we've always done so from a distance. I'm part of a new initiative for more immersive research." I waited for the punchline, for Elias to burst out laughing and tell us it was all an elaborate joke, but his expression remained earnest, his gaze steady. "That's so cool," Emma exclaimed, breaking the tension. "Can you do any alien stuff, like can you read minds or fly or anything?" Elias laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to fill the room. "I'm afraid not, Emma. In many ways, my people are quite similar to yours. We're just a bit more advanced in some areas." "Like what?" Jake asked, leaning forward eagerly. "Well," Elias said, tapping his chin thoughtfully, "we've mastered interstellar travel, for one. And we have technology that allows us to seamlessly integrate into other societies for observation purposes." As he spoke, I found myself torn between disbelief and a growing sense that, as crazy as it sounded, Elias was telling the truth. There was something in his eyes, a depth of knowledge and experience that seemed far beyond his apparent years. "I don't understand," I said, finding my voice at last. "Why here? Why our neighborhood?" Elias turned to me, his expression softening. "Your planet is at a crucial juncture in its development, Sarah. The decisions made by humans in the next few decades will shape not only your future, but potentially the future of this entire sector of the galaxy. We need to understand you better if we're to help guide you towards a positive outcome." "Guide us?" Tom's voice had an edge to it now. "What gives you the right to guide us anywhere?" Elias held up his hands in a placating gesture. Perhaps guide was the wrong word. "We have no intention of interfering directly. We simply hope that by understanding you better, we can provide subtle nudges in the right direction when the time comes." "And what direction is that?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "Towards peace," Elias said simply. "Towards a future where your species joins the galactic community rather than destroying itself or remaining isolated. But for that to happen, we need to understand what makes you tick. Your hopes, your fears, your dreams." As he spoke, I felt a chill run down my spine. Not of fear exactly, but of awe. If what he was saying was true, and God help me, I was starting to believe it was, then everything I thought I knew about the universe had just been turned on its head. "So," Jake said, his voice cutting through my reverie, "when you were digging those holes in your backyard, was that for some kind of alien stuff?" Elias blinked, looking genuinely surprised for the first time that evening. "Holes? I'm not sure what you mean, Jake. I haven't done any digging in my yard." Jake frowned. "But I saw you. Last night when I was supposed to be in bed. I looked out my window and saw you digging big holes in your backyard. You were out there for hours." I felt the blood drain from my face as I turned to look at Elias. His expression had changed, the warmth and openness replaced by something colder, more alien. "Ah," he said, his voice suddenly devoid of its earlier musicality. "I see. Well, I suppose there's no harm in telling you now. Those holes, as you call them, are actually interdimensional portals. Necessary for my work, you understand." The room seemed to tilt sideways as the implications of his words sank in. "Portals, to where? For what purpose?" "I think," Tom said, his voice shaking slightly, "that it might be time for you to leave, Elias." Elias stood, smoothing down his shirt with an eerily fluid motion. Of course, I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. That was never my intention. He turned to me, his two bright eyes boring into mine. Thank you for your hospitality, Sarah. This evening has been most illuminating. As he walked to the door, he paused, looking back at us with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Oh, and don't worry about the portals. They're perfectly safe, for now. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving us sitting in stunned silence. Mom! Emma's voice was small, frightened. What did he mean, for now? I opened my mouth to respond, to offer some kind of reassurance, but no words came out. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? As I looked around at my family's confused and scared faces, one thing became crystal clear. Our quiet life on Maple Street would never be the same again. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a little voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, inviting the new neighbor over for dinner hadn't been such a good idea after all. Story 5. The first thing I noticed was the smell, musty and dank like wet cardboard left out in the sun. It didn't fit. This was supposed to be a new car, wasn't it? As the realization dawned that something was very, very wrong, I heard the telltale click of the doors locking. My heart sank. This wasn't my ride home. This was the beginning of a nightmare. My name is Maya, and until about 2 minutes ago, I thought I was having a perfectly ordinary Friday night. I'd stayed late at the office, burning the midnight oil to finish a big project. By the time I finally shut down my computer and gathered my things, the streets were quiet and most of the surrounding buildings dark. I'd done this 100 times before. Open the app, request a ride, wait for the familiar ping. When the car pulled up, right make, right model, right license plate. I climbed in without a second thought. The driver didn't say much as we pulled away from the curb. Just a gruff evening that I barely registered as I slumped back against the seat, exhaustion finally catching up with me. It wasn't until we'd been driving for about 5 minutes that I realized we were heading in the completely wrong direction. Excuse me? I said, leaning forward slightly. I think you might have taken a wrong turn. My apartment is in Westbrook, not downtown. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting mine for a brief second. In that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something cold and predatory in that gaze. We're not going to your apartment, he said, his voice low and menacing. You're not going home tonight. Panic surged through me, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I lunged for the door handle, yanking it frantically. Nothing. Child safety locks engaged. Let me out! I shouted, my voice shrill with fear. Oh, stop the car right now! The driver just chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. Scream all you want, sweetheart. No one can hear you in here. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life, did they? But the growing fear in my gut told me this was all too real. I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking as I tried to unlock it. If I could just call 911 or send a message to someone. I wouldn't bother with that if I were you, the driver said, his eyes once again meeting mine in the mirror. No signal in here. Handy little device, signal jammers. You'd be amazed what you can buy online these days. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some opportunistic crime. This was planned, calculated, which meant my chances of getting out of this were slim to none. No, I couldn't think like that. I had to stay calm, had to think. There had to be a way out of this. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Look, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. I don't know what you want, but I'm sure we can work something out. I have money. Not a lot, but some. It's yours if you just let me go. The driver laughed again, a harsh barking sound. Oh, honey, this isn't about money. This is about so much more than that. As he spoke, I noticed we were leaving the city behind. Tall buildings giving way to industrial warehouses and eventually open fields. We were heading out of town to God knows where. Panic threatened to overwhelm me again, but I pushed it down. Think, Maya. What would the heroines in all those crime shows do? I scanned the back seat, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. Nothing. The car was immaculately clean, not so much as a stray piece of paper on the floor. My eyes landed on the seatbelt. An idea began to form. It was risky, potentially suicidal even, but it was the only plan I had. Slowly, carefully, I began to unbuckle my seatbelt, trying not to draw attention to the movement. If I could just get it off without him noticing. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," the driver said, his voice cutting through my concentration. "Wouldn't want to get in an accident now, would we?" I froze, my hand still on the buckle. How had he known? I hadn't made a sound. As if reading my thoughts, he tapped the rearview mirror. "Eyes everywhere, sweetheart. You can't make a move I won't see." Despair washed over me. What chance did I have against someone who seemed to have thought of everything? We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The rhythmic thrum of tires on asphalt became a sinister soundtrack to my spiraling thoughts. What did he want with me? Where was he taking me? Would I ever see my family again? Just as I was about to give in to despair, a small voice in the back of my mind spoke up. "You're smart, Maya. You've gotten out of tough situations before. Maybe not like this, but you can figure this out. You have to." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to really look at my surroundings. The car was clean, yes, but not spotless. There were a few crumbs on the floor mat, a coffee stain on the center console. This wasn't a professional job then, just a man. A dangerous man, yes, but still just a man. And men made mistakes. I noticed his eyes flicking to the side mirror more frequently now, a slight tension in his shoulders. Was he nervous about something? And then I saw it. A flash of red and blue in the distance behind us. Police lights. Hope surged through me, quickly followed by fear. If the driver noticed the police, he might panic. Do something drastic. I had to act fast. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "my dad's a cop. He always knows where I am. Tracking app on my phone." The driver's eyes snapped to the rearview mirror, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "You're lying." I shrugged, heart pounding. "Maybe, maybe not. But do you really want to take that chance? Those cops behind us might just be on a regular patrol, or they might be looking for me." His eyes darted to the side mirror again, widening slightly as he noticed the approaching lights. "Shut up," he growled, but I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "You're trying to trick me." "Am I?" I pressed, sensing his resolve weakening. "You seem pretty nervous for someone who's thought of everything. Did you check for tracking devices before you took me? Did you make sure no one saw you pick me up? Are you sure you covered all your bases?" The car swerved slightly as he checked the mirrors again. The police car was gaining on us now, its lights bright in the darkness. "Last chance," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let me out now, and maybe I don't tell them what you tried to do. Keep driving, and you're looking at kidnapping charges at the very least." For a long, tense moment, I thought he wasn't going to buy it, that he'd call my bluff and keep driving, taking me to whatever hellish fate he had planned. But then, with a string of curses, he yanked the wheel, pulling over to the side of the road. The locks clicked open. "Get out," he snarled. Now, I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled for the door handle, practically falling out of the car in my haste to escape. As soon as my feet hit the ground, I was running, sprinting towards the approaching police car with every ounce of strength I had left. Behind me, I heard the screech of tires as my would-be kidnapper peeled away, but I didn't look back. I just kept running until the police car pulled up beside me, an officer leaning out the window with a concerned look on his face. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly drained away, leaving me shaky and weak. I collapsed to my knees, tears streaming down my face as the reality of what I'd just escaped hit me full force. As the officers helped me up, asking questions I could barely process, I caught a glimpse of taillights disappearing into the distance. A shudder ran through me as I realized how close I'd come to a fate I didn't want to imagine. In the days and weeks that followed, as I gave statements to the police and sat through therapy sessions, one thought kept running through my mind. I'd faced the worst night of my life and come out the other side. I'd outsmarted a predator, talked my way out of an impossible situation. I was stronger than I'd ever known. And no matter what life threw at me from here on out, I knew I could handle it. As for ride shares, well, let's just say I stick to public transportation these days. Some risks just aren't worth taking twice. Story 6. I never should have slept in, but how was I to know that oversleeping would lead me to discover the horrors lurking behind the paper-thin walls of the Pinewood Motel? The shrill beeping of my phone's alarm pierced through my groggy consciousness. I fumbled for it, squinting at the too bright screen. 11:47 a.m. Shit. Checkout was at noon. I bolted upright, the scratchy motel comforter falling away as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The room swam into focus, generic landscape prints, chipped laminate furniture, and the faint smell of stale cigarettes that seems to permeate every budget motel room in America. Cursing under my breath, I stumbled to the bathroom. No time for a shower. I splashed water on my face and ran a hand through my disheveled hair. It would have to do. Back in the main room, I started shoving clothes into my duffel bag. How did I manage to spread my belongings across every surface in less than 12 hours? I grabbed my phone charger from the nightstand, dislodging a stack of brochures for local attractions. They fluttered to the floor, scattering across the worn carpet. As I bent to pick them up, something caught my eye. A dark stain on the beige carpet, partially hidden under the bedskirt. Probably just coffee, I thought. But as I shifted to get a better look, I realized it was larger than I'd first thought. And not coffee-colored at all, but a deep, rusty brown. A chill ran down my spine. I knew I should just grab my stuff and go. I was already cutting it close, but curiosity got the better of me. I crouched down, lifting the bedskirt higher. The stain was bigger than I'd realized, stretching out in an irregular pattern. It looked almost like... I swallowed hard, like something had been dragged across the floor. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding. It's nothing, I told myself. Old carpet gets stained all the time. Doesn't mean anything sinister happened here. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my gut. I glanced at my phone again. 11:54. I needed to get moving. I zipped up my bag and did a final sweep of the room, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything. As I approached the door, I heard voices in the hallway. Probably just other guests checking out, I thought. But something in their tone made me pause, hand on the doorknob. "Can't believe this happened again," a woman's voice said, tension evident even through the door. "Keep your voice down," a man responded, his tone clipped. "We don't need guests overhearing. Just get it cleaned up before anyone notices." My breath caught in my throat. What the hell were they talking about? I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear more. "But sir," the woman protested, "shouldn't we call the police this time? I mean, 2 in less than a month?" "Absolutely not," the man cut her off. "You know what that kind of publicity would do to this place? We'd be shut down in a week. No, we handle this ourselves, just like last time. Understand?" There was a long pause before the woman responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir?" I heard footsteps moving away down the hall. My mind was racing. What had happened? What were they covering up, and what did they mean by, again? I shook my head, trying to clear it. This was crazy. I was letting my imagination run wild based on an overheard conversation I didn't have the full context for. I needed to check out and get on the road. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't my problem. I opened the door cautiously, peering out into the hallway. It was empty. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and stepped out, letting the door click shut behind me. As I walked toward the lobby, I couldn't help but glance at the doors I passed. Which room had they been talking about? I tried to push the thought away, but my eyes were drawn to the baseboards, looking for any signs of... what? Blood? Bodies? I shook my head. This was ridiculous. The lobby was deserted when I arrived. A small bell sat on the counter next to a sign reading, "Ring for service." I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. Did I really want to interact with the staff after what I'd overheard? Maybe I should just leave my key and go. Before I could decide, a door behind the counter opened and a man stepped out. He was in his 50s, balding, with a paunch straining against the buttons of his shirt. A plastic name tag identified him as Dale, manager. "Checking out?" he asked, his tone brusque. I nodded, sliding my key across the counter. "Room 118. He tapped at the ancient computer, squinting at the screen. "All right, looks like you're all set. No additional charges. Have a nice day." He turned away, clearly dismissing me. I should have just left, should have walked out the door and never looked back. But the conversation I'd overheard was gnawing at me. I had to know. "Excuse me," I said. Dale turned back, eyebrow raised. I couldn't help overhearing earlier. Is everything okay? It sounded like there might have been some kind of problem." Dale's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not sure what you think you heard, but everything's fine here. We pride ourselves on guest privacy and security." The lie was so blatant it almost made me laugh. Instead, I pressed on. It's just, I heard something about calling the police and that it had happened before. I'm just concerned. You're mistaken, Dale cut me off, his voice cold. Nothing of the sort has occurred. Now, if you're checked out, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a full house tonight and rooms to prepare. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in Dale's eyes stopped me. There was something dangerous there, a warning. I was pushing too far, and he wasn't going to let me push any further. I nodded, grabbing my bag. Right. Sorry for the confusion. Have a good day. I turned and walked to the exit, feeling Dale's eyes boring into my back the whole way. As I pushed open the door, I heard him pick up a phone and speak in a low, urgent tone. I couldn't make out the words. The bright sunlight hit me as I stepped outside, making me squint. I walked quickly to my car, resisting the urge to look over my shoulder. As I reached for the door handle, movement caught my eye. A maid's cart was parked outside one of the ground floor rooms, cleaning supplies scattered around it. The door to the room was ajar. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity? A death wish? Whatever it was, I found myself walking toward that open door as if pulled by an invisible force. I peered inside, my heart pounding in my ears. The room was dim, heavy curtains drawn across the windows. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. The first thing I noticed was the smell, coppery and sharp, with an underlying scent of decay that made my stomach churn. Then I saw the sheets. They'd been stripped from the bed, piled in a heap on the floor. They might have been white once, but now they were stained a dark, rusty brown, just like the carpet in my room. My eyes traveled to the bathroom door, hanging slightly open. There was a smear on the handle, the same rust-brown color. It continued down the door frame as if someone had grabbed it with a bloody hand and been dragged away. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be real. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life in shabby roadside motels off the interstate. Except it did. And it had happened here more than once. I turned to run and slammed into something solid. I looked up into Dale's face, twisted with rage and something else. Fear. I thought I told you to leave, he snarled, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug in painfully. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Let go of me, I demanded, my voice shaking. I'm calling the police. Dale's laugh was hollow. No, you're not. You're coming with me. We need to have a little chat about what you think you saw here. He started dragging me toward the office. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let him get me inside. I planted my feet and yanked my arm back with all my strength. Caught off guard, Dale's grip loosened just enough for me to break free. I ran, across the parking lot, heart pounding, lungs burning. I heard shouts behind me, but I didn't look back. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. I threw myself inside and started the engine, tires squealing as I peeled out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw Dale standing in the lot, watching me go. He wasn't chasing. He didn't need to. The look on his face said he knew I wouldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? As I merged onto the highway, putting miles between me and the Pinewood Motel, I tried to steady my breathing. I told myself I'd call the police once I was farther away. Make an anonymous tip. Let them sort it out. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. The rational part of my brain was already trying to explain away what I'd seen. An injured guest, perhaps, a drunk who'd fallen and hurt themselves. Anything but what I feared it really was. Because to admit what I'd really seen would mean admitting that monsters were real. That they walked among us, ran shabby motels, and cleaned up the evidence of their crimes with nothing more than a maid's card and a "Do Not Disturb" sign. And that was a truth too horrifying to face. So I drove on, the hum of the road beneath my tires slowly calming my nerves. By the time I stopped for gas 2 hours later, I'd almost convinced myself it had all been a misunderstanding. Almost. But I knew one thing for certain. I'd never stay in a motel again without checking every inch of the carpet first. Some stains, once seen, can never be unseen. Story 7. The first time I noticed the blue sedan, I thought nothing of it. The second time, I felt uneasy. By the third time, I knew with chilling certainty that I was being followed. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. 6 hours on I-40, straight shot from Nashville to Memphis for my cousin's wedding. I'd made the drive a dozen times before, always uneventful. But as the miles ticked by on this sweltering August afternoon, I realized this trip would be anything but ordinary. I'd left Nashville later than planned, the afternoon sun already dipping towards the horizon as I merged onto the interstate. My ancient Corolla protested as I pushed it to 75, trying to make up time. The radio crackled, struggling to hold a signal as I left the city behind. 2 hours in, I noticed the blue sedan for the first time. Nothing special about it, just another car on a busy highway. But something made me glance in my rearview mirror a few minutes later. It was still there, a few cars back. I shrugged it off. Plenty of people were heading west on I-40. Coincidence, nothing more. An hour later, I pulled into a rest stop, bladder screaming for relief after too much gas station coffee. As I walked back to my car, a flash of blue caught my eye. The sedan was there, parked a few spaces down. A man leaned against it, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He was looking right at me. A chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive heat. I quickened my pace, fumbling with my keys. As I pulled out of the rest stop, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. The blue sedan emerged a minute later, sliding smoothly into traffic behind me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was crazy. I was letting my imagination run wild, seeing patterns where there were none. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into the back of my head. I pressed down on the accelerator, weaving through traffic. The sedan kept pace effortlessly, always staying a few cars back. Close enough to watch, far enough to not be obvious. My exit was coming up. A smaller state highway that would take me the last leg into Memphis. Surely he wouldn't follow me off the interstate. This would prove once and for all that I was being paranoid. I signaled and moved into the exit lane. In my mirror, I saw the blue sedan do the same. My heart began to race. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, only in movies and true crime podcasts. I took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. There had to be a rational explanation. The state highway stretched out before me, empty except for my car and the blue sedan. No more traffic to hide behind. No more pretending this was a coincidence. He was following me, and he knew that I knew. I pressed down harder on the gas pedal, my old Toyota groaning in protest. The sedan matched my speed easily, not trying to catch up, not falling behind, just waiting. My mind raced through options. I could call the police, but what would I tell them? I'm being followed by a car that hasn't actually done anything threatening. My phone showed 1 bar of service, flickering in and out. Out here, among empty fields and patches of woodland, I was on my own. I passed a sign for an upcoming town, Milton, population 2,300. Maybe I could find a police station there, or at least a crowded place to stop, somewhere with witnesses. But as I took the exit for Milton, my heart sank. The town was little more than a crossroads with a gas station and a boarded-up diner. No police station in sight. The gas station was a beacon of light in the gathering dusk. An old man sat in a rocking chair out front, eyeing me suspiciously as I pulled in. The blue sedan cruised past slowly, disappearing around a bend in the road. My hands were shaking as I got out of the car. "Excuse me," I called to the old man. "Is there a police station nearby?" He squinted at me. "Nearest sheriff's office is in Brownsville, be about 30 miles east. Something wrong, missa?" I opened my mouth to explain, then closed it. How could I describe the growing terror of the past few hours? The certainty that something awful was about to happen. "Just passing through," I said instead. "Thought I'd ask in case of emergency." He nodded slowly, clearly not buying it. "You be careful out there. These roads can be dangerous at night. If he only knew." I went inside to pay for gas, the bored-looking clerk barely looking up from her phone. As the pump clicked off, I saw it. The blue sedan crawling past the station again. My blood ran cold. I got back in my car, hands trembling as I turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. Thank God. I pulled out of the station, eyes darting between the road ahead and my rear-view mirror. There he was, headlights gleaming in the twilight, no longer bothering to stay hidden. I sped up, pushing my car to speeds it hadn't reached in years. The sedan stayed with me effortlessly. The gas gauge caught my eye, less than a quarter tank left. My stomach dropped. How would I let it get so low? I did the math in my head. 30 miles to Brownsville, maybe 50 miles worth of gas left if I was lucky. It was going to be close. The road stretched out ahead, empty and dark. Fields gave way to patches of dense forest. My headlights caught glimpses of eyes reflecting in the underbrush. Possums, raccoons, maybe deer, all watching as I sped past, the predator on my tail, 20 miles to Brownsville. The gas light blinked on, a quiet ding that might as well have been a death knell. I willed the car forward, praying to whatever might be listening to let me make it to town. 15 miles. The engine started to sputter. I could see the sedan closing the gap behind me. 10 miles. A sign warned of a sharp curve ahead. I took it too fast, tires squealing. For a moment I thought I'd lose control, but somehow I stayed on the road. 5 miles. The engine coughed, starved for fuel. I could see lights ahead, the outskirts of Brownsville. So close. 3 miles. The car began to slow, no matter how hard I pressed the accelerator. The blue sedan loomed large in my mirror. 1 mile. I was crawling now, the car gasping its last breaths. The sedan pulled alongside me. I kept my eyes forward, too terrified to look. Then, like a miracle, I saw it. A gas station, lights blazing in the darkness. I coasted into the lot on fumes and momentum, bumping over the curb as the engine finally died. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call 911, but a vehicle pulled in behind me, blocking my car. My heart sank. This was it. A tap on my window made me jump. I looked up to see a kind face peering in at me. An older woman, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "You all right, honey?" she asked. "Saw you coasting in. Need a jump?" I looked around wildly. The blue sedan was nowhere in sight. Had I imagined the whole thing? I ran out of gas," I stammered. The woman smiled. "Well, you're in luck. My Frank owns this place. We'll get you fueled up and back on the road in no time." As if in a daze, I got out of the car. The woman, Linda, she said her name was, chatted as her husband filled up my tank. I nodded along, still scanning the road for any sign of the blue sedan. "Where you headed?" Linda asked. "Memphis," I replied. "My cousin's getting married." Linda beamed. "Well, ain't that nice? You've got a ways to go yet. Why don't you follow us home? We've got a spare room, and these roads aren't safe to drive at night when you're tired." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to put as much distance between me and this place as possible. But exhaustion was setting in, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. "I don't want to impose," I started to say, but Linda waved me off. "Nonsense, we'd feel better knowing you're safe. Come on, it's just up the road a piece." Too tired to argue, I followed their pickup down a winding drive to a cozy farmhouse. Linda fussed over me, insisting I eat something before showing me to a homey guest room. As I lay in bed, I replayed the events of the day in my mind. Had I imagined it all? Was it just road fatigue and an overactive imagination? I was almost asleep when a flicker of movement caught my eye. I got up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. There, at the end of the driveway, headlights switched on. A car pulled away slowly. A blue sedan. My blood ran cold as I realized the truth. The chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. Story 8. The moment I heard the floorboard creak upstairs, I knew I wasn't alone in the house. And I knew with a certainty that turned my blood to ice that whoever was up there wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be an easy gig. House sit for the Andersons while they took a 2-week Caribbean cruise. Water the plants, bring in the mail, make sure the place looked lived in. Simple stuff, and they were paying me well for a high school junior with no real job experience. The first few days had been uneventful. I'd come over after school, do my homework at the kitchen table, watch some TV, then head home. Sometimes I'd invite a friend over. The Andersons had said that was fine as long as we didn't throw any parties. But tonight was different. My parents were at a work function, so I decided to spend the night at the Andersons. It felt a little weird sleeping in a strange house, but their guest room was nicer than my bedroom at home. Plus, they had a killer entertainment system that I was planning to take full advantage of. I'd ordered pizza, sprawled out on their plush sectional, and queued up a horror movie marathon. The irony of that choice wouldn't hit me until much later. It was around 11 p.m. when I heard it. A soft thud from upstairs, like something being set down. I muted the TV, straining my ears. Silence. Then, unmistakable this time, the creak of a floorboard. My heart began to race. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Old houses make noise all the time. But the Andersons' house wasn't that old. And in the week I'd been coming here, I'd never heard it make noises like that. I stood up slowly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Another creak, closer to the stairs this time. Someone was definitely up there, moving around. My mind raced through possibilities. Had the Andersons come home early? No, they would have called first. A neighbor checking on the house at this hour? I knew I was grasping at straws. Deep down, I knew the truth. Someone had broken in, not realizing anyone was here. My phone was on the coffee table. I reached for it with trembling hands, trying to remember if I'd locked the front door. I was pretty sure I had, but now I wasn't certain of anything. I pulled up the keypad to dial 911, then hesitated. What if I was overreacting? What if it really was just the house settling? I'd feel like an idiot if cops showed up for nothing. Another creak. Closer now. Whoever it was, they were heading for the stairs. Screw it. Better to feel stupid than end up dead. I started to dial, but my trembling finger hit the wrong number. As I tried to backspace, my elbow knocked against a lamp. It teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then crashed to the floor. The noise upstairs stopped abruptly. They had heard me. Panic surged through me. I abandoned the phone and looked wildly around the room for a weapon. The Andersons didn't seem like the type to keep a conveniently placed baseball bat around. My eyes landed on a heavy marble bookend. It would have to do. I grabbed it, the cold stone slick in my sweaty palm. Where should I go? The front door was too exposed. The kitchen had knives, but also a back door, another way for them to get in. My feet carried me to the hall closet before my brain had fully decided. I slipped inside, pulling the door closed as quietly as I could. The closet was small and dark, crammed with coats that smelled faintly of mothballs. I pressed myself into the corner, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. My free hand found my phone in my pocket. The screen's glow seemed impossibly bright in the darkness. I quickly dimmed it and pulled up the keypad again. I had just finished dialing 911 when I heard it, the slow creak of someone descending the stairs. My finger hovered over the call button. I should press it. I needed to press it, but terror had frozen me in place. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. They paused, and I imagined them looking around, searching for the source of the noise. Then they started moving again, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I bit my lip to keep from whimpering. Tears streamed silently down my face. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, in quiet suburban neighborhoods where the biggest crime was teenagers smoking weed in the park. The footsteps stopped just outside the closet. I could see a shadow blocking the sliver of light under the door. My lungs burned, desperate for air, but I didn't dare breathe. The bookend was slippery in my grip. If it came down to it, would I be able to use it? For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I lunged forward, throwing my weight against the door. There was a grunt of surprise from the other side. I fumbled with the lock, managing to click it into place. "Hey!" a muffled voice shouted. The door shuddered as they slammed against it. The thin wood wouldn't hold for long. With shaking hands, I finally pressed the call button on my phone. It rang once, twice. The door shook again. On the third ring, a calm voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's in the house, I whispered, words tumbling out in a rush. I'm at 1487 Oak Street. Please hurry. All right, stay calm, the dispatcher said. Are you in a safe place? Another slam against the door. The frame splintered. No, I whimpered. He's trying to get in. Police are on their way, the dispatcher assured me. Can you get out of the house safely? Before I could answer, the door burst open. A dark figure loomed in the doorway. Without thinking, I hurled the bookend at them. There was a satisfying thunk and a cry of pain. I didn't wait to see if I'd done any real damage. I bolted past them, phone still clutched in my hand. I could hear the dispatcher's voice, tinny and far away, asking if I was all right. I sprinted for the front door, fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I heard heavy footsteps, almost there. The lock clicked open. I yanked the door open and burst out into the cool night air, and ran straight into the chest of a police officer, his hand raised to knock. Whoa, easy there, he said, steadying me. Another officer brushed past us, gun drawn, entering the house. Everything after that was a blur. More police arrived. Neighbors came out to gawk. I sat in the back of a patrol car, a shock blanket around my shoulders, answering questions on autopilot. They caught the guy trying to escape through a back window. Just a garden-variety burglar, they said. He'd been hitting houses in the area for weeks, Figured the Andersons' place was empty. I nodded along, not really hearing. All I could think about was how close it had been. If I hadn't decided to spend the night, if I hadn't knocked over that lamp, if I'd frozen instead of fighting back. 1,000 little decisions that had led to me sitting here, shaken but alive. The Andersons came home early from their cruise. They were horrified at what had happened, full of apologies and gratitude. They called me brave, a hero even. I didn't feel brave, I felt lucky. And as the adrenaline faded, leaving me exhausted and numb, I felt something else. A creeping unease that I knew would linger long after the police tape came down and the windows were repaired. Because now I knew the truth that most people spend their lives avoiding. Safety is an illusion. Locks only keep out the honest, and sometimes the monster in the dark is all too real. I never house sat again after that night. For a long time I had trouble sleeping in my own home, jumping at every creak and shadow. But slowly life went back to normal, or something close to it. But to this day I always check the locks twice. I keep a baseball bat by my bed. And sometimes when I'm home alone and I hear a noise I can't quite explain, I feel that old familiar fear creeping up my spine. Because I know now that the most terrifying thing isn't what might be out there in the dark. It's the moment you realize it's in here with you. Story 9. The moment I stepped into room 237, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have turned around and never looked back. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially in a place like the Pine Grove Motel. It was supposed to be a quick overnight stay, just passing through on my way to my sister's wedding in Colorado. I'd been driving for hours, my eyes heavy with fatigue, when I saw the motel's neon sign flickering in the twilight. It wasn't much to look at. Just another rundown roadside inn, but it promised a bed and a shower, and that was all I needed. The office was empty when I walked in, a small bell on the counter, the only sign of life. I rang it, the cheerful ding eerily loud in the silence. After a moment, a door behind the counter opened and a man stepped out. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. I nodded, stifling a yawn. "Just for the night." He turned to a board of keys behind him, then paused, his hand hovering over one in particular. He seemed to be debating something. Finally, he grabbed a different key and turned back to me. "Room 235, he said, sliding the key across the counter. $40, cash only. I handed over 2 20s, eager to get to my room and crash. As I turned to leave, something made me glance back. The clerk was staring at me intently, an unreadable expression on his face. "Sleep tight," he said, the words sounding more like a warning than a pleasantry. I found my room easily enough, the faded numbers barely visible in the dim light of the exterior corridor. As I fumbled with the key, I noticed the room next door, 237. Its curtains were drawn tight, no light visible from inside. For some reason, a chill ran down my spine. My room was about what you'd expect from a cheap motel-faded wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and a TV that looked older than I was. But it was clean enough, and the shower had decent pressure. I was asleep almost as soon as my head hit the pillow. I'm not sure what woke me. A noise, maybe, or just that unsettling feeling of being watched. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:37 a.m. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized something was different. The air felt thick, oppressive, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, copper and decay. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The smell was stronger now. It seemed to be coming from the wall I shared with room 237. As I watched, transfixed, a dark stain began to spread across the wallpaper. It oozed downward, pooling on the carpet. I should have run. Should have grabbed my things and gotten the hell out of there. But some morbid fascination kept me rooted in place. I found myself standing, moving closer to the wall as if pulled by an invisible force. The stain was nearly black in the dim light, but I knew without a doubt that it was blood. Fresh blood, still warm as it seeped through the cheap drywall. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched it. The moment my skin made contact, a jolt of electricity shot through me. Suddenly, I wasn't in my room anymore. I was in 237, but not as it was now. It was decades earlier, the decor dated and garish. A man stood by the bed, his back to me. He was speaking to someone, his voice low and angry. I couldn't make out the words, but the menace in his tone was clear. He turned, and I saw the knife in his hand, blade gleaming in the lamplight. On the bed was a woman, her eyes wide with terror. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The man lunged forward, the knife flashing. I yanked my hand back with a gasp, stumbling away from the wall. The vision faded, but the horror of what I'd seen remained. It had felt so real, so vivid, like a memory, not a dream. My hands were shaking as I flicked on the lamp. The blood on the wall was gone, the wallpaper unblemished. Had I imagined it all? A soft thud from next door made me jump. It sounded like something heavy hitting the floor. Then, unmistakably, I heard footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps moving towards the shared wall. I held my breath, ears straining. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the wall. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a sound that turned my blood to ice. Fingernails scraping slowly down the other side of the wallpaper. I was out of the bed in an instant, grabbing my keys and phone. I didn't bother with my luggage, I just needed to get out now. I burst out of my room, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. The parking lot was empty, my car the only vehicle in sight. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at room 237. The curtains twitched as if someone had just been looking out. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing in the doorway of 237. Even from a distance, I could tell it wasn't quite right. Its proportions were off, its movements jerky and unnatural. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and the Pine Grove Motel as I could. When the sun finally rose, I pulled into a truck stop, exhausted and shaken. As I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened, my phone buzzed. A news alert. I clicked on it and felt my heart stop. Body found in local motel, the headline read. Police investigating death at Pine Grove Motel. With trembling fingers, I scrolled through the article. A maid had found a body in room 237 that morning. The victim hadn't been identified yet, but foul play was suspected. I must have made a sound because the next thing I knew, a trucker was knocking on my window asking if I was okay. I managed to nod, but I was far from okay, because I knew something the police didn't. Whatever had happened in room 237, it wasn't the first time, and I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be the last. I debated calling the police, telling them what I'd seen or thought I'd seen, but who would believe me? I'd sound crazy talking about blood seeping through walls and visions of decades-old murders. In the end, I did nothing. I drove on to my sister's wedding, plastered on a smile, and pretended everything was fine. But at night, alone in my quiet apartment, I couldn't shake the memory of room 237. I became obsessed, spending hours researching the Pine Grove Motel's history. It wasn't easy. The place had changed hands many times over the years. Records were spotty at best. But slowly, a pattern emerged. Every few years, stretching back decades, there would be a death at the motel. Always in room 237, always ruled accidental or unsolved. The details varied, but the outcome was always the same. I found old newspaper clippings, faded police reports, even a few blurry photos. And in each one, I saw echoes of what I'd experienced that night. A dark stain here, a shadowy figure there. Once you knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. But the most chilling discovery came just last week. I was digging through county records when I found it, a deed of sale for the Pine Grove Motel dated 1962. And there, listed as the new owner, was a name I recognized. The night clerk, the man who had almost given me the key to room 237 before changing his mind at the last second. He looked exactly the same in the grainy photo attached to the deed as he had the night I checked in. Not a day older, not a single gray hair. I don't know what's really going on at the Pine Grove Motel. I don't know if the thing in room 237 is a ghost, a demon, or something we don't have a name for. But I do know this. Sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that look ordinary on the surface. A rundown motel on a lonely stretch of highway. A gruff but unremarkable night clerk. A room that's just like any other until it isn't. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see the Pine Grove Motel's neon sign flickering in the distance, keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need a place to rest. because some rooms you check into, you never really check out of, and room 237 is always waiting for its next guest. Story 10. The moment I heard the coffee machine whir to life, I knew I wasn't alone. And in an office that should have been empty at 11 p.m., that realization turned my blood to ice. I hadn't planned on working late, but the Henderson account was a mess, and if I didn't get it sorted by morning, heads would roll, mine included. So here I was, burning the midnight oil, surrounded by the eerie quiet of an office long since abandoned by my coworkers. At first, I'd found the solitude comforting. No chattering voices, no ringing phones, just the soft hum of my computer and the occasional rumble of traffic far below our 37th floor office. I'd made decent progress, fueled by vending machine snacks and determination. But as the hours ticked by, the silence began to feel oppressive. Shadows seemed to lengthen, and every creak of the building settling made me jump. I told myself I was being ridiculous. This was my office, a place I spent 40 hours a week. There was nothing to be afraid of. Then I heard it. The unmistakable gurgle and hiss of the coffee machine in the break room down the hall. My fingers froze over my keyboard. I held my breath, straining my ears. There it was again, the clink of a mug, the soft whoosh of liquid pouring. My mind raced. Had I somehow missed a coworker working late like me? But I'd done a sweep of the floor hours ago, making sure I was alone before settling in for my long night. And I hadn't heard the elevator ding, hadn't heard any doors open. I stood slowly, my chair squeaking in protest. The noise from the break room had stopped. I peered out of my cubicle, half expecting, hoping to see a familiar face. The hallway stretched out before me, empty and dark, save for the emergency lights casting in sickly glow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain. No response. I should have left then. Should have grabbed my things and bolted for the elevator. But curiosity overcame caution, and I found myself walking towards the break room, each step echoing in the silence. The break room door was ajar, a sliver of fluorescent light spilling out into the hall. I pushed it open slowly, heart pounding in my chest. The room was empty, but the coffee machine was on, steam rising from its carafe. And there, on the counter beside it, was a mug. It wasn't one of the generic office mugs we all used. This one was dark blue with a faded logo I didn't recognize. I approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The mug was full of fresh, steaming coffee, and next to it was a sticky note, a message scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. "You should have gone home." A chill ran down my spine. This had to be some kind of joke, right? A prank by a coworker who knew I was working late. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something wrong here, something that went beyond a simple late-night scare. I backed out of the break room, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The office suddenly felt vast and alien, full of hiding places for what? An intruder? A ghost? I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was letting my imagination run wild. I hurried back to my cubicle, intent on grabbing my things and getting out. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped short. My breath caught in my throat. There on my desk, right next to my computer, was the blue mug. Steam still rose from its contents. It was impossible. I'd just seen it in the break room, and I hadn't heard anyone move past me in the hall. Yet here it was, as if it had materialized out of thin air. A new sticky note was stuck to my monitor. Last chance. Panic surged through me. I snatched up my phone and keys, leaving everything else behind. I ran for the elevator, jabbing the call button repeatedly. The floor indicator showed it was on the ground level. I watched, heart racing, as it slowly began to ascend. 5th floor, 10th, 15th. A noise behind me made me whirl around. At the far end of the office, a figure stood in the shadows. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its gaze on me. It took a step forward, then another. I turned back to the elevator. 25th floor, 30th. The figure was getting closer. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate. My fingers tightened around my phone. Should I call security, the police? Who would believe me? 35th floor, 36th. The footsteps were just behind me now. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for I didn't know what. The elevator dinged. I yanked the doors open and threw myself inside, slamming the lobby button. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse of the figure. It was right there, arm outstretched as if to stop the elevator. But it wasn't a hand reaching for me, it was wrong, twisted, inhuman. The doors shut and I sagged against the wall, gasping for breath. The elevator descended smoothly, floor numbers ticking down. I tried to calm myself. I was safe now. Whatever that thing was, it was trapped up there. I was so focused on steadying my breathing that I almost missed it. A faint scratching sound coming from above the elevator. My eyes darted to the ceiling. No, it couldn't be. The scratching grew louder. Something was on top of the elevator, keeping pace as it descended. I pressed myself into the corner as far from the ceiling panel as I could get. Floor 20, 15, 10. The scratching stopped. For a moment there was silence. Then a new sound, a quiet tap, tap, tap on the ceiling panel, as if something was knocking, asking to be let in. I bit back a scream. The elevator seemed to be moving in slow motion now. Floor 5, 4, 3. The tapping became more insistent. The ceiling panel began to shift ever so slightly. Floor 2. A seam of darkness appeared as the panel lifted. I saw the edge of something push through. A hand, but not a hand. Dark and twisted with too many joints. The elevator dinged. I didn't wait for the doors to fully open before I was squeezing through, stumbling into the lobby. I ran for the exit, not daring to look back. The night guard called out to me, but I ignored him, bursting out onto the street. I ran until my lungs burned, until I was blocks away from the office. Only then did I slow, gulping in the cool night air. I looked back the way I had come. The office building loomed in the distance, its windows dark except for the top floors. As I watched, lights began to flick on, floor by floor, racing down the building towards the ground, towards me. I turned and ran again, not stopping until I reached my apartment. I locked the door, then wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that twisted hand reaching for me. I called in sick the next day and the day after that. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the office, everything seemed normal. My coworkers chatted and laughed, the break room was bustling, and my cubicle was exactly as I'd left it, minus the blue mug and sticky notes. I wanted to believe it had all been a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But I knew better, because now, sometimes when I'm working late and the office is quiet, I hear it. The soft whir of the coffee machine coming to life, the clink of a mug being filled. And I know I'm not alone. I don't stay late anymore. When the clock hits 5, I'm out the door with everyone else. But sometimes, as the elevator descends, I swear I can hear something moving above it, keeping pace, waiting. I've thought about quitting, finding a new job far away from here. But deep down, I know it wouldn't matter. Whatever is in that office, whatever reached for me that night, it isn't confined to that building. It's patient. It's persistent. And sooner or later, it's going to catch up to me. Because some things once seen can't be unseen. Some doors once opened can't be closed. So I go to work each day, smile at my coworkers, and pretend everything is fine. But I always keep one eye on the clock. And when darkness falls and the office empties, I make sure I'm long gone. Because I know now that the scariest monsters aren't the ones that hide under your bed or in your closet. They're the ones that hide in plain sight, in the places you least expect. In the fluorescent lit halls of your office, in the hum of a coffee machine, in the shadows that stretch just a little too long when you're the last one left. And they're always waiting for you to work just a little too late. Story 11. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the usual musty odor of cheap motels. This was something darker, more insidious. It clung to the back of my throat like a warning. I should have left then. But when you're broke, desperate, and stranded in the middle of nowhere, even the Bates Motel starts to look inviting. The neon sign flickered weakly in the gathering dusk, casting an eerie red glow across the nearly empty parking lot. Pinewood Motel, vacancy, it proclaimed, though I doubted many tourists ventured this far off the interstate. My eyes darted to my useless car, hood up and steam still rising from the radiator. I sighed, hoisted my duffel bag over my shoulder, and trudged towards the office. A bell jangled discordantly as I pushed open the door. The interior was dimly lit, wallpaper peeling in the corners and a thin layer of dust coating every surface. Behind a scratched Formica counter stood a man who looked as worn and faded as his surroundings. "Evening," he mumbled, not looking up from a dog-eared paperback. "Need a room?" "Yes, please," I replied, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Just for tonight. My car broke down a couple miles back." He grunted, finally meeting my eyes. There was something unsettling in his gaze, a gleam that made my skin crawl. $50, cash only. I winced inwardly. It was steep for a place like this, but I didn't have much choice. I counted out the bills, painfully aware of how little remained in my wallet. "Room 13, he said, sliding a tarnished key across the counter. "End of the row. Checkout's at 11. I nodded my thanks and hurried out, eager to escape his unnerving stare. The night air felt oppressive, humid and still. Crickets chirped in the overgrown grass, their song taking on an almost mocking quality in the gloom. Room 13 was exactly what I expected. Shabby, outdated, with the faint scent of stale cigarettes lingering in the air. I tossed my bag on the sagging bed and sank down beside it, exhaustion finally catching up with me. I'd call a tow truck in the morning, I decided. Right now, I just needed sleep. A sharp knock jolted me awake. Disoriented, I blinked at the alarm clock. 3:17 a.m. glowed in angry red digits. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Hello?" I called, voice rough with sleep. "Who is it?" Silence, then so quietly I almost missed it. "Help me." My heart leapt into my throat. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the thin wood. "What's wrong? Do you need me to call someone?" "Please," the voice whispered. It sounded young, feminine. "Let me in. They're coming." Every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea, but the fear in her voice overrode my caution. I unlatched the door and opened it a crack. Nobody was there. I peered out into the darkness, squinting to make out shapes in the shadows. The parking lot was empty, no sign of movement anywhere. A chill ran down my spine as I slowly closed and locked the door. Sleep eluded me after that. I lay in bed, every creak and groan of the old building setting my nerves on edge. As the first hints of dawn crept through the threadbare curtains, I made up my mind. Broken car or not, I needed to get out of here. I threw my things haphazardly into my bag and headed for the office. To my surprise, it was already open, warm light spilling onto the cracked asphalt. The man from last night was there, looking even more haggard in the harsh fluorescent lighting. He barely glanced up as I approached the counter. "Checking out?" he asked, voice flat. "Yes," I replied, sliding the key towards him. "Listen, is there a mechanic nearby, or maybe someone who could give me a ride to the next town?" He shook his head slowly. "Ain't nothing for miles. Looks like you might need to extend your stay." My stomach dropped. "I can't. I'm nearly out of cash and—" "We can work something out," he interrupted, a sly grin spreading across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. "Always need help around here. Cleaning rooms, maintenance. You work off your debt, we'll get that car of yours fixed up." Every instinct I had was screaming danger. "Thanks, but I think I'll take my chances on the road. Maybe flag down a passing car." His grin vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that." My blood ran cold. "Excuse me." "See, we got ourselves a nice little operation here," he continued, voice eerily calm. "Folks like you, broken down, desperate. You come in, but you don't check out, not really." I backed away from the counter, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" He vaulted over the counter with surprising agility for a man his age. I turned to run, but he was faster, grabbing my arm in an iron grip. Now, he growled. "Don't make this difficult. You'll see. Once you've been here a while, you'll understand. This is your home now." I lashed out, my elbow connecting with his solar plexus. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I sprinted for the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The parking lot was no longer empty. A group of people stood between me and freedom, their expressions blank, eyes devoid of life. I recognized one, the girl from last night, the one who had knocked on my door. Up close, I could see the gauntness of her face, the dullness in her eyes. "Please," I gasped. "Help me." They didn't move, didn't even blink. Behind me, I heard the man recovering, his heavy footsteps approaching. I feinted left, then darted right, managing to slip past the human barricade. My lungs burned as I ran, not daring to look back. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt promising salvation. A car appeared in the distance, headlights cutting through the early morning mist. I waved my arms frantically, relief flooding through me as it slowed to a stop. An elderly couple peered out at me, concern etched on their faces. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked. I glanced back at the motel. The people were gone, melted away like a bad dream. Even my broken-down car had vanished. The neon sign flickered weakly in the growing light. No vacancy. I'm not sure," I stammered. "Can you give me a ride to the next town? Please." They exchanged a look, then nodded. "Of course. Hop in." As we pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. The motel receded in the rearview mirror, and with each passing mile, it felt more and more like a nightmare. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had glimpsed something dark, something that preyed on the vulnerable and desperate. And as we drove in silence, I couldn't help but wonder how many others hadn't been as lucky as me. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the last wisps of fog. I tried to focus on the road ahead, on the promise of a new day and the kindness of strangers. But the image of those empty eyes haunted me, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear human faces. I knew I'd never stay in another roadside motel again, and I silently vowed that someday, somehow, I'd find a way to expose the truth about the Pinewood Motel and its permanent guests. For now, though, I was just grateful to be alive, to have escaped the clutches of a place where late checkout took on a whole new, sinister meaning. As we crested a hill, leaving the nightmare behind, I allowed myself a small smile. I had survived. And in that moment, that was enough. Story 12. I never thought curiosity could be deadly until the day I opened Mr. Erickson's door. The stench hit me first. Musty newspapers and something far worse lurking beneath. If only I'd turned back then, before I saw the walls plastered with faces of the missing, before I heard those fateful footsteps from the basement. But I didn't, and now I can't unsee what I've seen or unhear what I've heard. This is how my ordinary life on Maple Street turned into a waking nightmare. It started on a Tuesday, sunny and mild, the kind of day that lulls you into a false sense of security. I was watering my petunias when I noticed Mr. Erickson's overstuffed mailbox across the street. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen the old man in days. Normally, he'd be out puttering in his garden or waving from his porch, but the house had been eerily still. I crossed the street, telling myself I was just being a good neighbor. The grass was overgrown, unusual for the meticulous Mr. Erickson. Unease prickled at the back of my neck as I approached the porch, noting the drawn curtains and the silence that seemed to emanate from the house itself. "Mr. Erickson," I called, rapping my knuckles against the peeling paint of the front door. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. The knob turned easily under my hand, unlocked. That wasn't like him at all. "Mr. Erickson," I called again, pushing the door open a crack. "It's Sarah from across the street. Are you all right?" The smell hit me like a physical force, musty and dank with an undercurrent of something rotten. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. "Mr. Erickson," my voice sounded small and scared even to my own ears. I should have left then. Should have backed away, closed the door, and called the police. But worry for my elderly neighbor overrode my better judgment, and I stepped inside. The entryway was dim, shafts of sunlight cutting through the gloom where they managed to slip past the heavy curtains. Dust motes danced in the air, and the floorboards creaked ominously under my feet. To my right, the living room was a sea of newspapers, stacks upon stacks of them, creating a maze-like landscape that left only narrow pathways to navigate. "Hello," I called again, my voice barely above a whisper now. The house seemed to swallow the sound. I made my way carefully through the newspaper labyrinth, noticing that many of the stacks were organized by date. Some went back decades. As I moved deeper into the house, I began to notice something odd about the papers on top. They were all open to specific pages, corners carefully folded down. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was seeing. Missing persons reports. Every single one. The walls, previously hidden behind the towers of newsprint, came into view. My breath caught in my throat. Where there should have been wallpaper or paint, there were faces. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, cut from newspapers and magazines, overlapping each other in a grotesque collage. Men, women, children, all with one thing in common. They were missing. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Give me away to whom? The rational part of my brain tried to assert itself. Mr. Erickson was just a harmless old man, right? Maybe this was some kind of Hobby? A morbid fascination with true crime, perhaps? But deep down, I knew better. This was something far more sinister. I should leave, I told myself. Leave now and call the police. Let them handle this. But my feet seemed rooted to the spot as my eyes darted from face to face. Some I recognized from recent news reports. Others were clearly older, the paper yellowed and curling at the edges. How long had Mr. Erickson been collecting these? A soft thud from somewhere below made me jump, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The basement. Someone or something was in the basement. Run, every instinct screamed. But a horrible curiosity held me in place. What if someone down there needed help? What if Mr. Erickson himself had fallen and couldn't get up? I crept towards the kitchen where I knew the basement door was located. Each step felt like an eternity, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The kitchen was just as cluttered as the living room, dirty dishes piled in the sink and on every available surface. The smell was worse here, a cloying, sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. The basement door stood slightly ajar, a rectangle of pitch darkness beyond. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingertips just brushing the worn wood when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps ascending the stairs. I stumbled backward, knocking into a precarious tower of dishes. They crashed to the floor, the sound deafening in the oppressive silence of the house. The footsteps paused, then quickened. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth. I careened through the newspaper maze, pages fluttering in my wake like accusing fingers. Faces blurred as I passed. So many faces, all of them lost, all of them trapped here in this house of horrors. I burst out onto the porch, gasping for fresh air. My legs carried me across the street on autopilot, not stopping until I was safely inside my own house, door locked behind me. I sank to the floor, trembling uncontrollably. What had I just seen? What had I almost walked into? The faces on the walls swam before my eyes, a testament to countless lives disrupted, families torn apart, and Mr. Erickson, quiet, unassuming Mr. Erickson, what role did he play in all this? I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands, dialing 911. As it rang, my eyes were drawn inexorably back to the house across the street. A curtain twitched, just for a moment. Was that a face peering out Mr. Erickson's or something else? 911, what's your emergency, The operator's calm voice jolted me back to reality. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain what I'd seen? Would they even believe me? Hello, is anyone there? The operator sounded concerned now. I need to report. I swallowed hard, trying to organize my thoughts. My neighbor. I think something's wrong. There are pictures. So many pictures of missing people and someone in the basement. I heard footsteps. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ma'am, are you safe right now? Yes, I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I'm in my house across the street. All right, I'm dispatching officers to your location now. Can you stay on the line with me? I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. Yes, I can do that. As I waited for the police to arrive, I kept my eyes fixed on Mr. Erickson's house. It stood silent and still, betraying nothing of the horrors within. How long had this been going on? How many people had disappeared only to end up as another face on that nightmarish wall? The sound of sirens in the distance was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. As two police cruisers pulled up, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Surely now the truth would come out. Whatever dark secrets Mr. Erickson had been hiding would be brought to light. But as I watched the officers approach the house, doubt began to creep in. What if they didn't find anything? What if Mr. Erickson had somehow managed to clear everything away in the short time since I'd fled? What if it had all been some sort of bizarre hallucination brought on by worry and an overactive imagination? The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. More police cars arrived, then an ambulance. I saw officers entering and exiting the house, their faces grim. At one point, a figure was brought out on a stretcher, a sheet pulled up over their face. Mr. Erickson or someone else entirely? As twilight fell, a detective crossed the street towards my house. I met him at the door, anxiety churning in my stomach. Ma'am, he said, his voice grave, we're going to need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. Did you find... I couldn't finish the question. He nodded slowly. What you reported, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We'll need to do a full forensic investigation, but it looks like your neighbor may have been involved in multiple disappearances over several decades. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was true. All of it was true. As I followed the detective to his car, I couldn't help but look back at Mr. Erickson's house one last time. In the gathering darkness, it looked almost normal. Just another quiet home on a quiet street. But I knew the truth now. I knew what lurked behind those walls in that basement. The faces of the missing would haunt me for years to come. But at least now, maybe some families would get answers. Some mysteries would be solved. All because I'd noticed an overstuffed mailbox and let my curiosity get the better of me. Sometimes being a nosy neighbor pays off. But sometimes it shows you things you can never unsee and plunges you into a darkness you never knew existed. As we drove away, leaving Maple Street behind, I knew my life would never be the same. The world felt darker now, full of hidden dangers and unspeakable secrets. But at least one of those secrets had been brought to light. And for the victims and their families, maybe that would be enough. Story 13. The moment I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. They weren't the eyes of someone taking me home. They were the eyes of a predator who'd just trapped his prey. By then, it was too late. The doors were locked, my phone was dead, and we were driving deeper into the night, far from the safety of the city lights. It had started like any other night out. The bass from the club still echoed in my ears as I stumbled out onto the sidewalk, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the stuffy heat inside. My friends waved goodbye, piling into their own rides home. I was the last one left, fishing my phone out of my pocket with clumsy fingers. Damn it, I muttered, squinting at the black screen. Dead. Of course it was dead. I'd been snapping photos and videos all night without a thought for my battery life. A car pulled up to the curb, window rolling down. "You need a ride," the driver called out. He looked normal enough, middle-aged, clean-cut, with a friendly smile. I hesitated. It wasn't my usual ride-share app, but I was tired, a little drunk, and more than ready to be home in bed. What were the odds of anything bad happening on a 5-mile drive? "Yeah, thanks," I said, sliding into the back seat. 1242 Oakwood Avenue, please." He nodded, pulling away from the curb. "Long night?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You could say that," I replied, stifling a yawn. The gentle motion of the car was already lulling me toward sleep. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city lights blur by. It took me a few minutes to realize we were heading in the wrong direction. The familiar landmarks of my neighborhood were nowhere in sight. Instead, we seemed to be driving towards the outskirts of town. Excuse me," I said, sitting up straighter. "I think you might have taken a wrong turn. My place is back that way." The driver's eyes met mine in the mirror again. This time, there was no friendly smile. "Oh, I know exactly where we're going," he said, his voice low and menacing. A chill ran down my spine. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Child locks. I was trapped. "Let me out," I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Let me out right now or I'll scream." He laughed, a harsh grating sound that made my skin crawl. "Go ahead. No one can hear you out here." I looked out the window, my heart sinking as I realized he was right. We were on a dark, deserted road, trees looming on either side. The city lights were just a faint glow on the horizon now. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I had no phone, no way to call for help. Even if I managed to break a window, we were moving too fast for me to jump out safely. I was completely at this man's mercy. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. He didn't answer, just kept driving, his eyes occasionally flicking up to the mirror to check on me. I searched the car desperately for anything I could use as a weapon, but came up empty. The back seat was spotless, not even a stray pen or piece of paper. We drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes or so. With each passing mile, my hope of escape dwindled. I thought of my family, my friends. Would they even know what had happened to me? Or would I just become another missing person, another face on a milk carton? The car finally slowed, turning onto a dirt road barely visible in the darkness. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. This was it. Whatever he had planned for me, it was about to happen. We pulled up to a small ramshackle cabin. The headlights illuminated peeling paint and boarded-up windows before he switched them off, plunging us into near-total darkness. "Get out," he ordered, his voice gruff. I didn't move. Maybe if I refused, if I put up enough of a fight. The click of a gun being cocked froze the blood in my veins. I said, "Get out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." With shaking hands, I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The gravel crunched under my feet as he marched me towards the cabin, the gun pressed against my back. The interior of the cabin was sparse. A table, a couple of chairs, and not much else. The musty smell of disuse filled my nostrils. How long had it been since anyone had been here? "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to one of the chairs with his gun. I obeyed, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. As he busied himself with something in the corner, my eyes darted around the room looking for any possible escape route. The windows were boarded up tight, and the only door was the one we'd come through. I was well and truly trapped. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned back to me, a length of rope in his hands. "Why does anyone do anything? Because I can." As he approached me with the rope, a surge of adrenaline coursed through my body. This was it, my last chance. If I didn't act now, I never would. I launched myself out of the chair, catching him off guard. My shoulder connected with his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. The gun clattered to the floor and we both dove for it. My fingers closed around the cold metal just as his hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me back. I twisted, aiming the gun at him with trembling hands. "Stop!" I yelled. "Don't move!" He froze, his eyes wide with surprise and anger. For a long moment we just stared at each other, the only sound our ragged breathing. "The keys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Throw me the car keys." Slowly. His jaw clenched, but he reached into his pocket and tossed the keys onto the floor in front of me. I scooped them up, never taking the gun off him. "Now face the wall and put your hands behind your head." He complied, muttering curses under his breath. I backed towards the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The moment I was outside, I ran for the car, fumbling with the keys. I could hear him shouting, his footsteps pounding after me. The engine roared to life just as he reached the porch. I floored it, gravel spraying as the car fishtailed onto the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I could see him growing smaller, still running after the car and shouting. Then he was gone, swallowed up by the darkness. I drove like a mad woman, not caring which direction I was going as long as it was away from there. Tears streamed down my face, sobs racking my body. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. It wasn't until I saw the glow of city lights on the horizon that I finally let myself breathe. I was safe. I had escaped. I pulled over at the first gas station I saw, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. The attendant looked alarmed when I burst in, probably a sight with my smeared makeup and wild eyes. "Please," I gasped. "I need to use your phone. I need to call the police." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and tearful phone calls to my family. They found the cabin, but my kidnapper was long gone. The car, it turned out, had been stolen weeks ago. As I sat in the police station, wrapped in a scratchy blanket and sipping lukewarm coffee, the reality of what had happened, what could have happened, truly hit me. I broke down, sobs shaking my entire body. The detective assigned to my case patted my shoulder awkwardly. "You're incredibly brave," he said. "Not many people would have had the presence of mind to do what you did. You saved your own life tonight." I nodded, wiping my eyes. He was right, I had saved myself. But I knew the ordeal was far from over. The man was still out there, and who knew how many other victims he had or would have in the future. As I was finally cleared to go home, the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. A new day. I had lived to see another sunrise, something that had been far from certain just hours ago. I knew the road ahead would be tough. There would be nightmares, therapy sessions, constant looking over my shoulder. But I was alive. I had fought back and won. And that man, wherever he was, knew that his victims could fight back. That knowledge gave me strength. As I stepped out into the early morning light, I took a deep breath. I was forever changed by what had happened, but I wasn't broken. I was a survivor. And no matter what came next, I would face it head on, with the same determination that had saved my life in that cabin. The city was waking up around me. People starting their day with no idea of the darkness that lurked just beyond the city limits. But I knew, and I would make sure others knew too. No one else would fall victim to that man, not if I could help it. With one last look at the rising sun, I squared my shoulders and began the long walk home. I had survived the darkest night of my life. Now it was time to step into the light. Story 14. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty aisles. I should have known something was wrong when I realized I was the only customer in a 24-hour supermarket at 2 a.m. But it wasn't until I saw the dead-eyed stare of the cashier that I understood the true meaning of terror. By then, it was too late. The automatic doors had sealed shut behind me, and I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. It had started innocently enough. A late-night craving for ice cream and the realization that my freezer was woefully empty. The big save was only a few blocks from my apartment, its garish sign a beacon in the night. I'd been there countless times before, but never quite this late. The parking lot was nearly empty as I pulled in, just a few cars scattered here and there. Probably belonged to the night staff, I thought. I grabbed a cart more out of habit than necessity and made my way to the entrance. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh, cool air conditioning hitting my face. The store seemed bigger somehow, the aisles stretching out endlessly under the harsh lighting. My footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. "Hello?" I called out, suddenly feeling foolish. Of course no one answered. It was the middle of the night after all. The night crew was probably in the back, restocking shelves or something. I made my way to the frozen food section, the hum of the freezers the only sound besides my own breathing. As I reached for a pint of Rocky Road, movement caught the corner of my eye. I turned, expecting to see another late-night shopper, but the aisle was empty. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air from the open freezer. I shook it off, grabbing the ice cream and tossing it into my cart. "Don't be ridiculous," I told myself. "You're just tired and jumpy from too much caffeine." But as I made my way towards the checkout, that feeling of unease grew stronger. Where was everyone? Even at this hour, there should be at least a few employees visible, right? I rounded the corner to the front of the store and froze. There, behind the single-lit checkout lane, stood a cashier, but something was off. He stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead with glassy eyes. His name tag read Steve, but there was nothing personable about him. Hi," I said, approaching cautiously. "Just this, please." Steve didn't respond. Didn't even blink. Up close, I could see that his skin had an odd, waxy sheen to it. My heart began to race. "Hello?" I waved a hand in front of his face. Nothing. "Are you okay?" Slowly, mechanically, Steve's head turned towards me. His eyes focused on mine, and I stumbled back with a gasp. There was nothing behind those eyes. No life, no soul. Just empty black voids where humanity should be. I abandoned my cart, turning to run. But as I reached the entrance, I realized with growing horror that the automatic doors weren't opening. I pushed against them, but they remained firmly shut. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the glass. "Somebody help me!" Movement in my peripheral vision made me turn. Steve was coming out from behind the counter, his movements jerky and unnatural. And he wasn't alone. From every aisle, figures were emerging. Employees in their blue vests, moving with that same robotic gait, all of them with those same dead, empty eyes. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I looked frantically for another way out. The customer service desk caught my eye. There had to be a phone there, right? I sprinted towards it, the sound of shuffling footsteps growing louder behind me. I vaulted over the counter, fumbling for the phone. My fingers shook as I dialed 911, praying for someone, anyone, to pick up. 911, what's your emergency? "Please help me," I cried. "I'm trapped in the big save on 5th Street. There's something wrong with the employees. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then slammed it down in frustration. Looking up, I realized I was surrounded. A sea of blank faces stared at me from all sides, closing in slowly but inexorably. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "What is this, No response. Just that eerie, synchronized movement as they drew ever closer. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on a letter opener lying on the desk. I snatched it up, holding it out in front of me like a sword. "Stay back!" I warned, though I knew it was useless. Whatever these things were, they clearly weren't afraid of a tiny blade. As the first of them reached out towards me, I slashed wildly with the letter opener. It caught the outstretched arm, slicing through the sleeve of the blue vest and into the flesh beneath. But instead of blood, a clear, viscous fluid oozed from the wound. The thing that used to be human didn't even flinch. Panic overtook me. I leapt over the counter again, narrowly avoiding grasping hands. I ran blindly down the nearest aisle, knocking over displays in my wake. But no matter how fast I ran, I could hear them behind me, their footsteps in perfect unison. I found myself in the back of the store, surrounded by swinging doors leading to storage areas and loading docks. One of them had to lead outside, right? I chose one at random and burst through it. The room beyond was dark, lit only by the red glow of exit signs. Shelves towered above me, stacked high with boxes and crates. The employee break room, maybe, or storage? I weaved through the maze of shelves, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. For a moment, all was quiet. Had I lost them? Then, with a loud buzz, fluorescent lights flickered to life overhead. I blinked in the sudden brightness, momentarily disoriented. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't alone. They were everywhere. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. But these weren't employees. Men, women, children, all with that same blank stare, that same waxy skin. They stood perfectly still, like mannequins in some twisted department store display. With growing horror, I recognized some of the faces. Mrs. Johnson, my third-grade teacher. Mike from the coffee shop down the street. Little Timmy, who used to deliver our newspaper. People who had gone missing over the years. People everyone had given up searching for. A loud crash behind me made me whirl around. The things that used to be store employees were pouring through the door, cutting off my escape route. I was trapped. As they closed in from all sides, my mind raced. What were they going to do to me? Turn me into one of them? How and why? What sick purpose did all of this serve? Just as I was about to make a desperate last stand, a new sound cut through the air. Sirens, police sirens, growing louder by the second. The beings around me froze, their heads turning in unison towards the sound. For a split second, I saw something like fear flicker in those empty eyes. Then chaos erupted. They scattered in all directions, some heading deeper into the storage area, others rushing back into the store. In the confusion, I saw my chance. I ran, faster than I've ever run in my life, through the store, past fallen displays and abandoned carts. The automatic doors were open now, and I burst through them into the cool night air. Police cars were pulling into the parking lot, lights flashing. I waved my arms frantically, screaming for help. An officer rushed towards me, his gun drawn. "What's going on?" he demanded. "We got a 911 call." "In there," I gasped, pointing back at the store. "People, not people. I don't know. You have to see for yourself." But even as I spoke, I knew it was too late. Looking back at the store, I could see that it was empty. No sign of the army of not-quite-humans that had been there moments before. Just a normal, brightly lit supermarket. The police searched, of course. They found nothing. No evidence of anything unusual, just a few overturned displays that could easily be explained by a panicked shopper running through the store. They didn't believe me. How could they? It sounded insane even to my own ears. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. And I know they're still out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting. I don't go out at night anymore. I certainly don't shop at 24-hour stores, but sometimes when I'm walking down a crowded street in broad daylight, I'll catch a glimpse of someone who doesn't quite fit. Someone whose movements are just a little too stiff, whose eyes are just a little too empty. And I wonder, how many of them are there? How long have they been among us? And most terrifyingly of all, what are they planning? One thing's for certain. I'll never look at a late-night grocery run the same way again, because now I know that sometimes the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes they're standing right next to you in the checkout line, waiting for their chance to strike. Story 15. The laughter of children should be a joyful sound, but that day in the park it filled me with dread. As I watched the strange man approach the swings, every parental instinct I had screamed danger. But it wasn't until I saw the other adults, blank stares, that I realized this was more than just a lone predator. This was a nightmare that had been hiding in plain sight all along. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. the kind that draws families out of their homes and into the sunshine. I brought my daughter Lily to her favorite playground, a sprawling wooden structure with slides, swings, and plenty of hiding spots for games of tag. As we approached, I could see the place was bustling with activity. Kids of all ages clambered over the equipment, their shouts and laughter filling the air. Parents dotted the perimeter, some chatting in small groups, others glued to their phones. "Can I go play, Daddy?" Lily asked, practically vibrating with excitement. I smiled down at her, giving her ponytail a gentle tug. "Of course, sweet pea, just stay where I can see you, okay?" She was off like a shot, making a beeline for the swings. I found an empty bench with a good view of the playground and settled in, pulling out a book but keeping one eye on Lily. That's when I first noticed him. A man, probably in his late 40s, standing at the edge of the playground. He wasn't with any children that I could see, and something about the way he was watching the kids made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I lowered my book, focusing my full attention on him. He was average-looking enough, khakis, polo shirt, neatly trimmed hair. But his eyes, there was an intensity there that set alarm bells ringing in my head. As I watched, he began to move, slowly circling the playground. He'd stop occasionally, smiling and waving at children who caught his eye. Most ignored him, too caught up in their play, but a few waved back and the man's smile would widen. I glanced around at the other parents, sure that someone else must have noticed this odd behavior. But to my surprise, no one seemed to be paying any attention. They were all engrossed in conversations or their phones, oblivious to the potential threat. The man was getting closer to the swings now, closer to Lily. My heart began to race. I stood up, ready to intervene, when something made me pause. A little boy, no more than 5 or 6, had fallen off the monkey bars and was crying. His mother, who had been chatting with another woman nearby, turned towards the sound. But instead of rushing to comfort her child, she just stood there. Her face was blank, devoid of any concern or emotion. I blinked, sure I must be misinterpreting what I was seeing. But as I looked around, I realized it wasn't just her. All of the adults had the same empty expression, the same lack of response to their children's calls. A chill ran down my spine. What was going on here? The strange man had reached the swings. He was talking to Lily now, gesturing towards the woods that bordered the park. She was nodding, starting to climb down from her swing. That snapped me out of my shocked paralysis. I sprinted across the playground, my heart pounding in my ears. "Lily!" I shouted. "Come here right now." She turned, surprised by my tone. The man looked up too, and for a moment our eyes met. What I saw there made my blood run cold. It wasn't just predatory interest, there was something inhuman in those eyes. I reached Lily, scooping her up into my arms. She squirmed, protesting. "But Daddy, the nice man was going to show me the fairy house in the woods." "No, sweetie," I said firmly, backing away from the man. "We don't go anywhere with strangers, remember?" The man's friendly smile had vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. Now, he said, his voice oddly soothing. "There's no need for alarm. Why don't you join us? There's plenty to see in the woods." "Stay back," I warned, looking around frantically for help. But the other adults were still just standing there watching with those blank expressions. The man took a step forward and I saw something flicker across his face. A ripple, almost like his features were shifting. For a split second, I could have sworn his eyes were completely black. That was all I needed to see. I turned and ran, clutching Lily tightly to my chest. Behind me, I could hear the man calling out, his voice changing, becoming less human with each word. "You can't protect her forever," he snarled. "They're all ours in the end." I didn't look back, didn't stop running until we were in the car, doors locked. Lily was crying now, scared by my obvious fear. "It's okay, baby," I soothed, trying to keep my voice steady as I started the engine. "We're going home now. Everything's going to be fine." But as I pulled out of the parking lot, I could see in my rearview mirror that the playground had erupted into chaos. Children were screaming, running in all directions. The adults, or whatever they were grabbing at them, their movements jerky and unnatural, and there, in the center of it all, stood the man. He was changing, his form rippling and stretching. The last thing I saw before I turned onto the main road was his face splitting into a wide, inhuman grin filled with far too many teeth. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd seen. Lily had fallen asleep in her car seat, exhausted from the excitement and fear. As I carried her into the house, I tried to convince myself that it had all been some sort of hallucination. Maybe I'd been working too hard lately. Maybe I was coming down with something. But deep down, I knew it was real. And I knew we weren't safe. I spent the rest of the day in a paranoid frenzy, checking and rechecking the locks, closing all the curtains. I called my wife, who was away on a business trip, but hung up before she could answer. What could I possibly say? She'd think I'd lost my mind. As night fell, I sat in Lily's room, watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. How could I protect her from something I didn't understand? A noise from outside made me stiffen, footsteps on the front porch. Then a knock at the door. My heart raced as I crept downstairs, peering through the peephole. It was Mrs. Johnson from next door, an elderly woman who often babysat for us. "Hello," she called out. "Is everything all right? I saw you come home in such a rush earlier, I was worried." I hesitated. Mrs. Johnson had always been kind, always seemed normal. But after what I'd seen today, how could I trust anyone? "We're fine," I called back, not opening the door. "Just not feeling well. Thanks for checking." There was a pause. Then, in a voice that made my blood run cold, Mrs. Johnson spoke again. "Are you sure? Why don't you open the door? Let me have a look at little Lily. Make sure she's okay." The way she said that last word, drawing it out unnaturally, confirmed my worst fears. They had found us. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. We couldn't stay here. But where could we go? Who could we trust? As if in answer to my unspoken question, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're not crazy. You're not alone. If you want to protect your daughter, come to 1256 Elm Street. Come now." I stared at the message, torn between hope and suspicion. It could be a trap. But as I heard more footsteps joining Mrs. Johnson on the porch, I realized I was out of options. I ran back upstairs, gently waking Lily. "Hey, sweet pea, we need to go on a little trip, okay?" She blinked up at me sleepily. "Where are we going, Daddy?" I managed a smile, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "On an adventure, but we have to be very quiet, like spies. Can you do that for me?" She nodded, her eyes wide with excitement. I scooped her up, grabbing a backpack I'd hastily filled with supplies. We crept down the back stairs and out through the garage. As I strapped Lily into her car seat, I could hear voices at the front of the house. They were trying to get in. I peeled out of the driveway as quietly as I could, not daring to turn on the headlights until we were a block away. In my rearview mirror, I could see figures spilling out of my house, their movements jerky and wrong. As we drove through the dark streets, Lily drifted back to sleep. I kept checking the mirrors, sure we were being followed, but the roads were empty. Finally, we pulled up in front of 1256 Elm Street. It was an ordinary-looking house, no different from its neighbors. But as I approached the front door, it opened before I could knock. A woman stood there, her face grim but her eyes kind. "You made it," she said. "Quickly, come inside. We have a lot to talk about." As I carried Lily over the threshold, I knew our lives would never be the same, but at least now we weren't facing this nightmare alone. The door closed behind us, and for the first time since that afternoon in the park, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever these things were, whatever they wanted with our children, we would find a way to stop them. We had to. The alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. As the woman led us deeper into the house, I could hear others moving about, talking in low voices. A resistance, perhaps? People who knew the truth and were fighting back? I held Lily closer, breathing in her familiar scent. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Even if it meant facing down monsters that wore human faces. The real fight was just beginning.